Hello. We'll give folks maybe 1 minute or two to join the session. Feel free to let me know if you can't hear me or anything in the chat. Feel free to drop in and say hi as well. Hi. Hi, Luis. Welcome. Thanks for joining the session. All right, so I'll give maybe 1 more minute and then I'll go ahead and get started. So I do have some kind of upfront content here to share with you all. I'll share my personal story of how I have broken into management, as the title of this suggests. And then I largely want this to be interactive, especially with this group. I think that, yeah, this can just be as much of a discussion as possible. I would like to kind of minimize it feeling like just like me teaching stuff, because I certainly don't have the just like the content for teaching something like that. It's very hard to just say, here's what you should do, and this is what's going to work for everyone to make a career change like this. And of course, everyone has their different priorities of what their previous experience is like, and then how that affects like what strategy they should take to make the next step in their career. So this definitely, feel free to get as specific as possible with asking any questions, and I think that will make it hopefully the most useful for everyone here. But with that, I will go ahead and kind of get started here. I see that folks are trickling in, and really, yeah, really excited that y'all made it here. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm Jesse. I will share some of my stories. So yeah, I'm from the Central Valley of California, born and raised in Bakersfield. Don't know how many of y'all have heard of that place, but it really feels like I'm from kind of the farms. My parents both were farm workers. Used to take me to work with them, and my dad's in construction now. So definitely humble beginnings, and grew up with both my parents being coming from Mexico, um, basically to work hard and to give me a future that they didn't have, all these opportunities to go into education. And I'm definitely super grateful for, as I'm sure many here are, right? The sacrifices of those who came before us definitely is what allows us to even have the opportunity to be talking about these things. So that's definitely where I'm from, and that's the path that I see. Like, parents have worked really hard, um, always encouraged me to go to school, and that's just go get a good career, right? But that's great. I think they did get me to go to college. I ended up getting accepted to UC Berkeley, where I studied cognitive science, not computer science. Still ended up going into software engineering. So if you have questions about, I don't know, folks here, if you all are software engineers or in different parts of tech, or even not even in tech, right? That's totally fine. But I have a lot of shared experience with regards to going into engineering without having an engineering degree. So that's where I started at. Ended up breaking into just like software engineering in general by got an internship actually like my junior year. That was a role at Apple, which I felt very lucky to be in the right place at the right time, to meet the recruiters at that org. That was software engineering. and ended up leaving that to do my own startup. I have a lot of experiences there for folks about like fitting in, or like what does it mean to, be come from our backgrounds and fitting into huge corporate experiences. So I definitely didn't, nothing against their culture, but I didn't feel like it was necessarily the place where I wanted to be for super long. And a lot of that corporate stuff is there, and I'll share a little more about what I mean in the later discussion. But yeah, I ended up leaving to do a startup that ended up, being completed. We didn't get to where we wanted, so we left the startup and went into consulting in a management role for the second time. Startup was kind of the first official management role, but it was very small. And then now I'm at Facebook, where I'm a software engineering manager there. A lot of my interests career-wise are in linguistics and natural language processing within machine learning. So definitely feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions with regards to that, what AI is like in big companies. But that's a little bit about myself. I'm not going to be sharing the screen. I'll just go ahead and go into the majority of the talk here. And I see Go Bears. Yeah, woo, Go Bears. So that's what's going on here. I do see Nidia, do you have any comments? I see you're also the moderator here, and we haven't connected before, but feel free to let me know about anything would you like to say. Otherwise, I'll go into the discussion. And I see a request in the queue, so let me see what that means here. Great. So I think there's going to be questions. Yeah, feel free to ask your questions in the queue. I've got the chat open, and there's also a Q&A, which you can use. Either one of those, I think I'll look at periodically from time to time. But the three major things I wanted to go over here, without bogging you down with too many text-heavy slides, are first one, what does a software engineering manager even do? That's something that some folks, I mean, you might work at big companies and you kind of see what your manager does, but those who are a little newer would let's just say, what does a software engineering manager do? Second one is, how can you even get management experience? That's probably the bulk of where I think useful content can be. But if you do want to, you like the idea of what a software engineering manager does, or just manager in general does, how can you get that opportunity to even do that? Because applying to places, they usually want management experience, especially for external hires. So how can you get that so-called experience to even break into that? That's something that was super vague for me, I know, early on. And then the last one is, can leadership be learned, or is it just a certain type of person that that is like cut out to be a manager? So I definitely have my thoughts there, and I have some resources or suggestions for how we can learn that methodically. So then really I want to start off with what does software engineering manager do? I have three things that I think that our job really boils down to. One of them is communicating the vision. So that's super important for a team of just anyone doing anything, as like, why does our team exist? Why are we here? And how does our work plug into each other to create value for other people? These are super vague, high level questions, but I think the manager's role is to a large extent explaining why we have to work together, and like how we can work together to do basically whatever it is that we're doing. So some of the really difficult situations are like when people are in a team that's like, I don't really know what there's clarity, like we don't know what we're working on and why. Believe it or not, if you haven't experienced that, then consider yourself lucky. But especially at huge, bigger companies, this type of thing I see happen all the time, where people are on a team of like 5 to 10 people or however many. And if you ask any engineer or any person on the team, like, can you give me the one sentence of what your team does? People will not really have that. And that's due to the manager not basically giving that one line of why our team exists. So smaller companies like a startup, even people will have disagreements there, but it seems easier there, right? Because a lot of it is just like the product, which is the one thing that's going on. It's like, I don't know if you're in a startup that's doing some sort of app for customers, whatever the app does, that's like why your team exists. You're doing the software for that or the marketing for that or whatever it is that they're doing. For larger companies, it's oftentimes you're doing like some like a pipeline for data to like inform someone else to make a good decision, right? It's like because it's so huge, no one person runs like, I don't know, YouTube or even like Instagram, any of these big products that you would think of as like one thing. It's not just like the team doing it, it's really specific teams doing like a very small specific thing to provide value like in some way that is sometimes intangible. Oftentimes you're writing code or like people around you are doing stuff that it has to be communicated is what I'm saying. So as an if those type of questions like those, why are we working together, like what type of story can we say to weave um, our work together, if that stuff's interesting, then you might be in the right spot, because that's stuff that's exciting to me, and a lot of that communicating vision is hard, right? So that's a big thing to get into management. And going hand in hand with that is basically creating strategy. So yeah, what should our team focus on? How do we prioritize all the asks we get from everyone? Again, that's a thing that is different at small companies and big companies. In small companies, I think you always have too much to do, and you can pretty much, because you wear so many different hats, as they say, you can get all these requests and or like even feature requests, like people say, hey, we should do this or that, or you're getting feedback. You have to be the one to kind of say, what are we going to work on? What are we going to choose to deprioritize and not work on? And at a big company too, oftentimes you have like other teams that are asking stuff of you, that they say, hey, can you help us out with this? And weird corporate things like that. But all that means is that your job is to prioritize what you're working on and what you're not. And you have to be the person to say no. That's one of the challenges, is how do you gracefully say no? Again, pointing to like, here's why our team exists and here's why what is being asked of us is not 100% that. That comes with having a very secure vision, or like a very specific way why your team exists. And the other super important one that I feel like I should have said first, but is enabling the success of the people on your team. I would say that even in like in corporates, or like in, I would say like in evaluation structures of like, what do people prioritize the most? Like out of all the things that you could be doing, what's the most important? That's the most important at big companies and at small companies too. Is just having the well-being of your team and making people feel like they're doing good work and that it's being recognized. And conflict resolution, all those like people stuff. If you feel like if you care about other people and want to enable their success and like mentor folks, career growth, all that stuff is super core, and that's like the most important thing that I would say a software engineering manager or any type of manager will do. Because if people are not feeling recognized or happy, or there's a lot of conflict and it's not fun to go to work, then they will quit and the company will fail or the product will fail, right? So that's even beside all those things of like, is there a vision, is there a strategy, is it prioritized? It starts with people, and if they're unhappy, then it's none of those other things matter. So I would say those are what a software engineering manager does. I'm sure there are questions in the queue already that I see here, but I'll go into maybe addressing some of those. But yeah, that's my experience on what I think a software engineering manager does in general. And I do see that this is great. Some questions here is, what's the transition from being an individual contributor to a people manager or a project manager? That's great. I think that's what I definitely want to share a lot about, is what is that transition like? So my specific one was a little unusual, right? I think I was a just software engineer on a big company, and I left to do a startup. So that was vague. If you're interested in startups, again, feel free to reach out. But I would say the typical thing that I've seen, and that I've been now in bigger companies for some time, is that usually you will, the most, I would say, not easy, but I would say the most like cut out way to typically go from individual contributor to a manager role is to be within one company and like get promoted and be very explicit with folks around you that you want to go to the so-called manager track. And that's the most like stable way, I would say, to go into management in terms of like what is possible for people. I think it's less likely, still possible, but less likely that you can be an engineer or an individual contributor at a company and then get hired into being a manager at another company. I think promotions through hiring or through switching jobs are great. That's awesome. I recommend that thoroughly. I would say if you want to jump up quickly in career track over a long term, then the best thing is not really to stay at one company for the longest time, because market is hot, as you all know. And people will give you like higher titles within your existing track. But the important distinction is that people management and just like coding or doing individual work are different skill sets that if you were to basically, if you've never had the title of manager, then it's very hard for someone to hire a new manager, especially because you're going to be brought in to lead an existing team. And for someone to say, oh, here's this stranger from another company or from elsewhere who's now supposed to be mentoring you and leading you, that's a little hard, right? Just from like it hard for that to make sense for companies. But what is less hard is for someone to say, hey, this person has been working at our company for 2 years or whatever amount of time. Their work has been great, and there's a management role opening up. They have expressed management behaviors and interests to go into this. So they are now the manager here. And sometimes it's through promotion, like you lead a team and your manager is like also maybe leaving or going to grow into another role. But that's the, I would say, the most stable, and what I see is the most common in terms of like peers that I see in my current workplace or in other workplaces, is that you will get kind of promoted into management from a high level individual contributor. So that's the how. But then going on those lines, like, so what should you do if you want to do that? How can you get that management experience to become promoted? Or even if you don't want the actual title of manager like right away, then how can you like get a taste of it and like get to know whether it's for you, right? So I'll say one thing is definitely to do informal leadership type of like experiences. So what does informal leadership mean? Is basically doing stuff that managers do or that people in like official roles will do without having the same title that those people will have. So that's pretty much up to you, and free. It's freer than we think to do work that people like high above our titles will do without having. So I'll give you examples of what that means. One is that realizing that managers and everyone above that, right? Like managers, senior managers, these directors, everyone is spread thin and they're constantly like too busy, right? I'm sure many of you all are as well too busy, but when you know that people are spread thin and have too much on their plate, any help to bring order to chaos is often like super well received, right? That doesn't mean that anything that you offer is going to be received, but even small things, small specific things I'll share with you that have been helpful for me, and that even in my current workplace where I recently joined have already started to be helpful, is one, the value of this cannot be understated, but volunteering to take notes at large meetings, and second, out of those notes, what are the resulting action items that came out of this meeting? That's like hugely valuable, right? I would say not every meeting has that. I'm sure many of you get added to random meetings that people are always like, so what was the point of that? Or, okay, there were ideas discussed in it, but people suggested that some people should do things, but what were those again, right? Not everyone's writing everything down, right? So, and the manager, maybe you have a manager who always is like great at, being super clear about what the action items for everyone here are, but I would say more often than not, given that first fact that people are spread thin and not always just like on top of it and writing everything down, if you offer to take notes and say, even so, here's an example of like what that would mean, right? So you get added to maybe a 30-minute or 1 hour meeting. Vague action items were discussed, and it's not so clear what happens after. You can very well reach out to, let's say, your manager, or the whole group as a whole, but you can just say, hey, I just want to share with you, took some notes at the last meeting. Here are some of the proposed action items that I saw. And if you send that as like a bullet point of like, oh yeah, X person to do this, or like X person to follow up with this person by this day, that's not you assigning stuff to anyone, or not you like stepping out of your like box where you're supposed to be. Like, it's not like that. It's really like help, right? You're providing help to someone who should be doing that, or like could have been doing that, but it's not within their mental capacity to do everything all the time. So that's just like a bonus thing that you can just like provide value to your manager, right? So that's doing stuff like that is a helpful thing. That's like helping manager out, and that's doing what managers kind of do to some extent. So another thing is, so that's an informal way that you can do that, right? And if you do like a good note, or like make a very clear action items out of a vague meeting, then you will continue to have those opportunities, especially if it's like super valuable for a specific person. Then people will ask you to like, oh, can you take notes at this meeting? And now if you're like a person who's known for bringing clarity, or like creating action items from stuff that's vague, that's like one of the job description of manager, right? So then you'll continue to have more opportunities there. And I would say that's something that people don't often want to do. Like, who wants to take some lame notes, right? Like, people don't. It's not a fun thing to do, but it's that means that you will probably not have competition, and like, oh, everyone's fighting to be the one who writes down the action items, right? Like, it should be that way. I feel like whoever writes down the action items kind of has the power of interpreting what the priorities are, and you can like influence what you think should be done. But more often than that, people are just like trying to get through the meeting and not really do anything. So that's an opportunity for you to provide value to your manager. And if you consistently do that, and you express to your manager, hey, I'm interested in management track, then that's a fast track to getting promoted in my eyes. And so that's one thing. We'll take a look at the chat again right now here. So note taking is underestimated. Yeah, so these synthesizing information is super, super huge. So that's just one of them. Another one is observing leadership. So that's a big one that I think has been really helpful for me, and that I'll say is like totally recommendable and within our power to just do. Is whenever you're in meetings, or you're even just like with people, or like observing people with the title that you want, or even like many titles above you, whatever it might be, basically you have the ability to observe them and to see what is on their mind, and what are their concerns, and what sort of comments and questions do they ask at meetings. So for example, let's say, and this happens all the time where I work now and where I used to work at Apple, is every once in a while, like, I don't know, once a quarter or a month or something, we have like a review where the director, who's like way above, comes and gets a presentation from like senior managers of like what the team's progress has been on some product or something, right? So these are commonly like engineering reviews, or just like director reviews, whatever they might be called, where you are. Is every once in a while you're in a meeting with someone who you're not in a meeting with that often, and they're like in some leadership position. So observing and even writing down, like specifically for yourself, what type of questions did that person ask? So like that special, like that director person who leads the whole product or something, what are they asking your manager? And can you start to ask some of those questions? So it's totally in your power to even copy, or like paraphrase questions that your manager gets asked, and you ask them to your manager. Like, that's you already signaling leadership to them. So I can make that more specific. Is like a thing that directors will frequently ask are like, I don't know, how do we plan to measure the success of this type of thing? That's a very vague one, but that's a type of question that I would imagine like a director asks our team of like, okay, here's our cool product, it's super awesome, and then they'll ask, how are you going to measure that this is the correct thing that you're doing, right? That's very in your capacity now to observe, okay, I know that the director always asks this stuff. So then when you're in a meeting just with your manager, or even with your peers, you can start to ask questions like that, like, how will we measure success? Or that's a very specific one, but your team, I'm sure, will be different in how that's split up. But the tip is observe leadership and ask the type of questions that they ask, right? That's again, and I say this because I'm like super introverted and I always have this like feel like a lot of the experiences that I've had have been motivated by, having like social anxiety or like fearing that I'm stepping out of my place or like my box to like, oh, be too managey or something. But this is totally like a low risk type thing of, you're not even saying like, hey, you do this work or blah blah, like you're not trying to be the manager when you're not, you're just asking questions as within everyone's capacity to do, right? Like intern or like whatever level you might be, you can ask questions, and you start asking questions like the director asks questions, then you're kind of set up for getting that. So that's another small tip. But I did want to touch on kind of the, let's say, the making this relevant to our topic is, as with like imposter syndrome and a lot of those things, I think there's a lot of self-doubt that comes with, do I even belong at, and I'll share with you my personal experience at the first company that I worked for. I didn't feel like I belonged necessarily there, and it was totally like manufactured in my own head due to, a lot of historical things. But that imposter syndrome that I know that many of us here feel, like, do I belong in tech or like at this company? Did I just get lucky and slide in for some weird reason? Those type of things, I mean, we deal with them and we have our, support systems for that. But the reason that's relevant to this discussion is that I feel like I have in the past hindered myself with not believing that I should even start asking these or like taking these steps. Like, who am I to be the one to bring order to chaos in this meeting when I'm not sure if I even, belong at this company, right? So that will self-limit us to even start saying these things. The other one that I didn't mention, to get management experience, is just to declare to your manager, hey, I'm interested in management track. So during your one-on-ones or like during your career conversations, stating that officially to your manager, they'll ask you like, what do you want to get out of your career? I know that when I was starting out, a lot of my responses were, oh, I just kind of want to get experience and like see what's going on and, see if I like engineering, like stuff like that. Then what that signals to your manager is that you're not very sure of what you want, and whatever might come out of that. But I say that because that stems again from the imposter syndrome of me not, or, an individual not being sure that they belong somewhere. So who am I to ask or to even state that I want to like grow into management when, I have all these self doubts. So I would say that a lot of these steps, I mean, everyone will have their own individual challenges and limitations that are from their past history. Like basically, everyone has their own hill to climb. So I'm sharing my story here, but those are things that are definitely worth addressing and discussing, directly and between yourself, like introspection or like speaking with a friend or, to whoever, because those are things that, um, are cause us to like not grow as fast as we potentially could, for reasons that are totally addressable and, due to, identity and a lot of really important things. But with that, I'll go into the, chat here. Paraphrasing, yeah, paraphrasing questions from leaders is huge. Um, a question here that I see in the chat session is, in my perspective, what's easier, joining as an external new hire to a company as a new manager, or staying within our current company and growing into a manager role? So yeah, that's a huge one. I'll say staying within a current manager. Yeah, it's staying within a current manager, basically getting promoted, is easier. Um, if you're looking for like most and easier in terms of like most probability of success and shortest expected time to get the title that you want. And some of those tips that I shared, like the mirroring and the like taking notes and owning trackers, which is another thing I didn't mention so much. But yeah, owning trackers, being the one to make an Excel spreadsheet of like all the deliverables and being one to follow up. That's something that I know individuals frequently do, that managers don't always want to be the one to do. So that's a huge one here. Um, I see this here, so I think this is an important question. I'm not sure if I have the right answer, but someone mentioned, I'm job searching and I mainly see manager roles open. Is there a reason for this? So is that more like, so you're looking for engineering roles, but all you see is manager roles? Is that kind of it? Um, I will say that, and feel free to clarify that, but I can give my interpretation of why I think there would be more manager roles open than engineering roles, which is a little weird to me. But if you're seeing that there's a ton of manager roles and not engineering roles, then I would say that I would say manager roles go unfilled, especially external hire, like postings that you would see, like on LinkedIn or on job boards. It's my experience that when people are hiring an engineer, it's a little quicker to the supply of experienced and qualified engineers is higher than the supply of experienced and qualified managers. I think there's just less, and especially with all the specifications that they go with, like, oh, N years of job experience or whatever they're looking for. Oftentimes manager roles are more specialized too. So it'll be like, yeah, we're looking for a manager with experience in, I don't know, 3D reconstruction of 2D images and like 5 years of experience in like this one thing. So it's like very tech and specific of like must have led teams in this specific domain. So that's a reason. So my explanation for that might be that it's not that there's more supply of there's not that there's more demand for managers than there are for engineers. Clearly there's it's like especially with the triangle setup, like engineers totally lead a company and they are the ones who drive success. But I will say if you're seeing more manager posts open, it's maybe that they take longer to fill, and that's another thing, right? And they're more specific, and they take longer to fill because they're oftentimes more specific, and sometimes yeah, just have very specific things that can go open for. I've seen them go for like many months, and I would say that's also an opportunity for you though. If you have some management experience, I would say that it's been my experience at large companies that um, people are the most frustrated with failing management roles, like or even like lead roles, like tech lead roles, where it's like because they need a very specific skill set. Then if you can have a clear idea of where you want to go and you can like craft your brand to make signal that you have that skill set, then the the only thing stopping you is the interview, right? Which I have my tips there for like what we can do there. But yeah, the interview is really all that there is, right? Like if you meet the job description, sometimes they're very specific, but that means that it's an opportunity. It's basically a rare thing that you can come and provide like extreme value to someone and then leverage it to get like um, high pay or a bonus or something. But yeah, that's it. What is manager? So yeah, great questions here. Will continue to answer them as much as possible. And that's pretty much all the content that I had in terms of like trying to share with you things. I did have one about can leadership be learned, which I'll elaborate on, but I definitely want to answer these questions. So someone here said, looking for um, what is manager turnover? I think that's a good one there. Um, Manager turnover being like managers being like leaving quicker. I'll say manager turnover is usually less than engineering turnover. I would say that if you're a skilled engineer or like just any type of engineer, um, the current market signals that you don't stick around at one place because everyone is trying to hire you, and you can just keep getting paid more and more and get like higher titles by just like switching around. Like that's the trope that you hear of people in like Silicon Valley just like switching like 1 to 2 years all the time, right? But so the turnover rate for engineers and is like that, right? Because that's what the market signals right now. But I'll say for managers, it's the higher up you go, the less frequent I think job changes are. So for example, directors and stuff like they will, and I say this because I not I don't stalk people, but I try to like go and search the LinkedIn's of like directors or like people in my org, like people high up, like basically somewhere that I want to be, like what would it take to get to that person's spot. And I do see that people who have higher titles like director or like president or VP and stuff will come in with like 10 years of leader experience of experience at one company, right? Very frequently I'll see very highly competent and capable engineers being like, oh, 1 to 2 years this company, 1 to 2 years this company. But the higher you go in leadership, the more I think, and the easier of a narrative it becomes for you to provide value to someone else by saying, yeah, I stuck with, I don't know, Amazon for 10 years from 2000 to 2010. Like someone with that title, you would definitely want them to be like leading your team versus someone who switched around every 2 years, because these companies, like these larger orgs, they take longer, their plans take longer to like execute and to even see if they're success or failure. So turnover rate, I think, will get lower and lower the higher you go to. That being said, my personal turnover rate is not the best on paper. I think my average tenure has been like 2 years at places, but I do see that the higher you go, the less okay that is, especially with management, just because of the type of work that you do with developing people. Like, how can you develop someone's career if you only lead them for like 1 year, right? That's less. You have less opportunity to just like do something beneficial for people. Whereas if you manage someone for 3 years, you can definitely see their growth from, I don't know, university hire to like getting promoted the first time to then like them switching to another area, right? Like that, those are type of questions that you might get asked in management interviews, like when did you promote someone, or like when did you see someone's, I don't know, career turn around from low performer to high performer, and what did you do to influence that? Those are experiences that you'll only have on a longer term. So that's why I think it's less recommendable to switch the more into management you get. So that's a lot of stuff there. Hopefully that's helpful. Another question here that I'll read out. I don't. So one quick question: as a manager, how do you balance the need to oversee teams' work to ensure accuracy and completeness of tasks without overstepping and micromanaging? And okay, so I'll answer that one before reading to the next part. Which, yeah, that's a great question. That is up to the individual team that you're on, like to what extent people need direction. So in my current team and in teams that I've been fortunate to be a part of, I think the management role is specific to like more like people development and vision communication, and less of, I don't know, being the one to make the core technical decisions or like being the one to track stuff. Oftentimes there are, I don't know, project managers or like a product manager to manage those like the execution stuff. Clearly you have a lot of that as well on your plate as a manager, but it's less of hounding people for like, hey, did you do this task? um, that's one, is that the manager role is less like that in general. But the other thing that I'll say is that one of it is trusting your team, and really, I would say, yeah, it comes down to trust, right? Where it's like having faith that your team will figure things out, with you giving them minimal micromanaging. I think especially with, and let's say it's a gradient between like, let's say a new hire, like someone who is very early on in their career. Probably if you tell them the vision is to create the platform that will unite like blah 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 blah, then you say you have 6 months to do it, like good luck, right? I think that's less helpful, right? I think with people who are earlier in their career or who need more direction, you might have to say, you might have to break down the project into like 2 week sprints, or like into, basically do more of that day-to-day management of do this task and then do this task and then do this task. Here, I made a tracker. With someone earlier in their career, they would actually appreciate that more. And if you gave the same guidance that you did to a young team than you did to a team of like people who have 10 years of experience, then it would not work, right? So it's not that managers should always be hands off. It's just, some people will want more of that guidance. But on the flip side, if you have someone who is like super experienced, maybe even older than you, I know folks on my team are like way more experienced than me as well, on the technical side. Then, and you tell them, here's how you should plan your day to day. Please check in on with me on these tasks. Then that, not only is that just like doesn't show that you have like self-awareness, but it's like less helpful for them, right? Like they actually don't need that. They more need the strategy of like, oh, how does this play into other teams that is not my job to think about? So then you can do some of those like, oh, enabling success, like connecting them with other teams and doing stuff like that. So my answer is, it's not it's not bad to give specific guidance when it's needed, but definitely you should check in on what does the current team need, and where can you basically provide value for them. So experienced people need more of that vision and creating strategy across teams. Newer folks would probably appreciate some of the day-to-day management more. And if you find that new folks are rejecting some of that, then it's going to be in the communication of how you do it, right? And just doing good principles with project management. That's a whole field, and there are experts in project management that are not me, but there's a lot of resources for learning that. So that's on that. So that's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. The other question here was any tips on best practices on how to work with managers and directors who micromanage, and to avoid falling into that habit in management. Yeah, so that's I think a separate question, is why I want to address it separately. Is so let's say you are being micromanaged, or like some director in your chain likes to control a lot of stuff. I would say that without knowing the specifics there, it's hard to give a good advice, but I I have worked with people who have more or like more micromanaging, right? So then I'll say, what do you do to address that? I can give a generic starting point of, I think a lot of the times that people will micromanage is because they had specific experiences that they're trying to avoid. So the common trope with a micromanager is that, they've trusted people in the past and then they've been let down. So they really care about the success of the product. So they don't trust that when somebody says, "Oh, hey, I'm working on it," or "I got it," that they actually mean that, because they maybe put too much trust in previous people and they were let down. So they want to prevent that. So that's I think one of the common reasons for people being micromanagers. Maybe people have there are different personal reasons for that, but the way I came to that conclusion, or the way I'll suggest for you to come to similar conclusions, would be to basically find common ground with that person. So basically keep going up the I'll say, so whenever there's a disagreement, and this is like a framework that you can use, whenever there's a disagreement, keep going like up levels in what you don't agree in, and finding the common ground. So like basically, let's say you disagree on, like, you want something to be executed a certain way and the director or whoever's managing you wants it to be executed a different way. That's the disagreement. But then what is the like lowest level of priority that you care about, that you both care about? It's like the least common denominator of common ground. That's vague, but I'll say like that. An example might be like, we want the success of the product. That's if it that's like the highest level. That's like a super high level thing, but that might be the only common ground that you have with this other person, of like what you agree on is that. And it's probably more specific than that. Like, oh, we want to, I don't know, get 1 million customers on our product between now and the end of the year. It's usually like, it's less specific than just success of the product or like well-being of the company. It's like sometimes you can agree on, we agree on this like performance indicator, or like this goal that we're all trying to hit. It's aligning on the shared goal. So how do you deal with micromanagers is find the first shared goal that you have, and then basically make it known that you agree with that. So in these discussions, it'll sometimes get heated, but then you can say something like, state what you think that that common ground is. So I want to enable the success of this, 1 million users by the end of the year. And then they might say something like, I want that too, right? So once you know that you agree on that, then the strategy of how to get there is what is on the table. And I think a lot of the time people will, that seems super basic, but I'll say people will be combative or like disagree with you, because sometimes they don't feel unsafe, or they don't even know that you agree with them on that. Like they might think that you want personal gain, or that you want to slack off, or like take a nap. I don't know what stories or victim stories people tell themselves when there's lack of safety and all of that. But it's finding common ground, reestablishing safety. And there's a good book that I'll now go into, but it's called Crucial Conversations. I wrote it down here, and I'll maybe paste in the chat. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson is one way that you can establish. Like a lot of these will have to be addressed very directly in like actual conversation. It's not something that just gets fixed in passing. It's like a crucial conversation that you have where you establish this. And there are specific frameworks that go into way more detail than I was able to share right now. But I'll paste this in the book here. Yeah, take a nap. that was when here. Yeah, and that's also advice that I have. But yeah, that's all um, with that question of dealing with um, micromanagers. It's difficult, right? But it's the general advice is don't be combative. Don't accuse people. Never tell someone you're micromanaging me, right? Like that's not how you come to the solution. It's like it's more like a productive and safety inducing place that doesn't put you in the mind share of them as a like an opponent, because it's like your peer and you're working with them to solve the problem once you establish a shared purpose. But that's so one thing I recommend is that book. So the last point that I wanted to make here, and I want to be mindful of time, it might be this might only go to 12:30. So actually this might be the last thing I say, but leadership can be learned. There's a good amount of books that I wrote down here. I'll paste them into you. I'm a firm believer in audiobooks. I don't know if y'all are visual learners or audio type learners, but I listen to a lot of stuff as a musician. So I like to listen. So I would recommend, if you want to learn more about like what is management like and what is good management, this book, The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins, is like, it's been super awesome. It's supposed to be about what's the first 90 days on a new job as a manager, but it's a great way to just learn about like what should management priorities be. And I have no doubt that it will be helpful for you if you take a look at it and you're just curious about management. It's like super philosophical and like what is the purpose of management, and it gives you very specific things as well, like what questions do you ask people in order to get clarity. So that's a good one. Crucial Conversations. And another one here is Good to Great. These are helpful for interviews, I'll say. Whenever they ask you questions in interviews and they'll say, tell me about a time when this, if you can give the specific example and then also share it within the context of a framework, um, like the ones in Crucial Conversations or First 90 Days or Good to Great, then that makes you seem so experienced and also shows that you read books, which is a good thing. But that's all that I think we have time for. Correct me if I'm wrong that this ends at 12:30. But yeah, that's it. I'm here still. Feel free to reach out to me on um, social media. So LinkedIn counts as social media, which, yeah, my name is Jesse Salas. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also personally, and I'll paste my thing here. You can also personally email me if you're interested in any further questions. Then I'm very happy to do any of those follow-up discussions. But thank you so much for your time, and yeah, thanks for everything. Thanks for your attention.